but it will all depend on both sides and their leaderships to figure out how they go about these talks, what will be the mechanism going forward, and now that they've started meeting face to face, can they continue doing that?
So, Osama, you reported that there may be some progress on Lebanon and Iranian assets, and as you just pointed out, the Pakistani Prime Minister had really urged both sides to be flexible here. I wonder, based on what you're hearing, are the Pakistanis actually optimistic for a breakthrough here?
Well, if that is one word in Islamabad right now from the corridors of power, whether to talk to military sources, diplomatic sources, or people in the politicians, they're all hopeful that there is something on the table. Now, they don't want to. There's almost a gag order here in Islamabad where no official will speak to you because they don't want to cast any shadow over what is coming between these two sides. So they're hopeful, they're optimistic, and they're trying to convince both sides to continue talking. And that they've said that this is a platform that is available to them, whether they continue tonight, whether they continue next week, or want to come back to Pakistan. According to the hosts, they're ready to host more talks.
All right, let's see what happens. Osama bin Javed for us there in Islamabad. Appreciate the reporting. Let's head over to the White House now, where our correspondent Kimberly Halkett is standing by. Let's head over just across the street in Islamabad, where our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, is standing by for us. So, Kimberly, look, negotiations are often about striking a conciliatory tone. That is maybe not the tone being sent out by the U.S. President Donald Trump on his social media site, Truth Social. What has he been saying, and do we know if it's having any impact on these talks?
Well, we're going to get to that in just a second because I want to show you what's behind me. If you can see off in the distance there, that building that has lights all along the top is the Serena Hotel, where these talks have been going on. And I should point out, and I have not been able to confirm this because I've been standing out here, but I am relying on Al Jazeera's live updates that the first phase of historic direct talks between the United States and Iran has now concluded. So what we know is that both sides are exchanging written text aimed at confirming they're on the same page on agreements reached in first round of direct in-person talks, obviously since 1979. And we should also point out that there are some sources who are reporting, again, I cannot personally confirm this, but I have been hearing this extensively, that there is an attempt to unfreeze some of the assets belonging to the Iranians, which we know was of a great desire. So that would be the breaking news that is just coming down, that these talks have concluded for now. The big question becomes, what happens next? Is there going to be a further round of discussions? Are they going to spend the night in the Serena Hotel and get back at it at breakfast? We simply don't know, because I'm finding out in real time, just like everybody else. But what I can tell you is that there is a real desire, given the fact that the U.S. Vice President has made the trip here, a lengthy one that involves not a direct flight, but a stop in Europe for refueling, that this is something that can be moved forward in terms of trying to iron out some of the big issues. For the United States, that looks like limiting Iran's ability to have a nuclear weapon and to get the Strait of Hormuz open. Now, again, we're going to have to dig with our sources to find out what was agreed upon in the hotel behind me there. But what I can tell you is that right now the top line appears to be that the talks have concluded for the moment.
And surely in the next couple of days, there's nothing more important on the vice president's schedule than these talks. But let's see where all this goes. Kimberly, we appreciate the reporting. Let's go to Tehran now. Ali Hashim is standing by for us there. So, Ali, yesterday, the Iranian speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, was threatening not to come to these talks at all until there was a ceasefire in Lebanon and Iranian funds were unfrozen. Well, now, not only are the Iranians there and talking, they're actually in the same room, or at least were in the same room until the talks wrapped up for the day. What do we know about the Iranian approach here in Islamabad?
Well, what we are hearing is that the Iranians were able to get a kind of a guarantee from the American side that the Israeli side is going to decrease its attacks on Lebanon. This is on one side. Then we heard from Iranian media sources on Iranian media outlets that the U.S. is going to unfreeze Iranian funds. But there's nothing that's been confirmed from the other side or even from Israel with respect to Lebanon. Yes, there have been less attacks on Beirut and the southern suburbs, but there's nothing that was announced with respect to a ceasefire. Now, the Iranians here are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, they cannot sacrifice their deterrence in the region and their relation with the Lebanese group Hezbollah, especially there's a credibility issue here. On the other side, they cannot ruin a ceasefire because of an external factor. So this issue is creating a lot of pressure, already created a lot of pressure on the Iranian team. Now, given the fact they've met, given the fact they are in the same room and they're planning to have another day, then things are moving. Now, how are they moving? Are they bridging the gaps? What's going to happen with respect to the highly enriched uranium? This is a big question. And the biggest question is what's going to happen with respect to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we saw reports that there have been an agreement on dividing or co-managing the strait, and the Iranians denied that completely. And on the other side, there have been reports of American vessels passing, military Navy vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians on the other side also completely denied that. So for the moment, we are in the middle of unconfirmed reports from both sides.
All right, Ali Hashim for us there in Tehran. Ali, thank you. Well, Iran and the U.S. have outlined their conditions for ending the war, but there are some pretty major differences. U.S. media leaks suggest it includes a 30-day ceasefire, while Iran is calling for a complete halt to strikes and guarantees against future attacks. The U.S. wants 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities to be dismantled, Tehran to never develop a nuclear weapon, and to stop the enrichment of uranium. Tehran rules out any restrictions on an enrichment program. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is a key demand. Iran wants guarantees to exercise sovereignty over the waterway. The U.S. also wants Iran to end its support for regional non-state actors like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. But Iran is demanding the U.S. and Israel stop the war on all fronts, including fighting its regional allies. All right, I'm joined now by Dania Dhafar, Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. And from Islamabad is Maria Sultan. She's the chairperson and president of the South Asian Strategic Stability Institute University and an advisor to Pakistan's Ministry of Defense. Thank you both for being here. Maria, I want to start with you. Can you help us understand what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now? You have the Americans saying that they've had 2 ships pass through that strait. The Iranians are denying that that has taken place at all. Based on your knowledge, is it possible, you think, that an American warship could pass through that strait with its defenses safely?
Well, without the Iranians giving a safe passage, it's impossible because Maham 7 has got the capacity to not only differentiate between military vessels, but also between commercial vessels. And this is one of the major reasons that UAE's military fleet has not left the bay and has not gone into Strait of Hormuz to clear it.
And just to clarify, so there's nothing on board an American warship that would be able to shoot down whatever incoming the Iranians might fire their way?
It's not a question of fighting the way, it's a question of understanding what's under the water. And the Iranian Midget-class submarines are underwater, and they are the ones which are laying down the mines. And then they have got an entire strategy which is built around UAVs, it's built around, drones, and also coastal defense. So unless and until the Iranians do not give a safe passage, it's impossible for the American military fleet to move freely in the Strait of Hormuz.
Got it. Understood. The threat is from under the water. Okay, Dania. Look, if the United States cannot get a deal in Islamabad that completely opens the Strait of Hormuz without it becoming a tollway, what would be the impact on U.S. Gulf relations?
This is an important question, and I think this is a red line for the Gulf states, because when this war started, the Strait of Hormuz was not an issue. And, the main issue was Iran's ballistic missiles, its nuclear program, and its proxy connections throughout the region. And now you've added something that is effectively making Iran the policeman and using the Strait of Hormuz as a vehicle of extortion against the Gulf states and their economies. This is extremely dangerous for many of the Gulf states. It's very bad for the UAE as a trading hub in the region, for Kuwait with its high degree of oil resources, and for Qatar, especially for its gas transport. And Bahrain is also locked in. So this is very dangerous for the Gulf states in terms of products coming in, and also for the international community, because you have 1/3 of the world's helium, which is really important for microchips coming out of the Gulf. You have fertilizer, which is important for food security globally. And on top of that, hydrocarbon resources that are the lifeline to Gulf economies. So in terms of the U.S., I think this would be a huge disappointment from the perspective of the Gulf states, and I think would make them reconfigure and recalculate in some way their relationship with the U.S. We haven't gotten to that point yet. I think this is a big factor of consideration from the Gulf states' perspective, though. Yeah, and it's hard to overlook.
Yeah, that would certainly be significant. And it's also noteworthy that, look, obviously the United States is the most powerful, ostensibly military in the world, and you have a lesser power that's able to effectively shut down this strait. And so, Maria, look, when it comes to military power and what is actually possible, do you think that there is a realization, and do you think that these two sides are in Islamabad talking right now because they've both realized that there are limits to what you can achieve militarily?
I think the problem here is this, that the military domain has brought in something which we had talked about in books, but Iran has actually displayed it. That is the use of asymmetric warfare against military and high military platforms. And that is something, just to put it in perspective, like $588 million was spent by the United States and the Gulf countries just to intercept the missiles. And in comparison to that, Iranians have spent less than 15 million. And, there's different statistics with regards to that. So this ratio is actually 60-1. So when you are actually 60-1. So when you are fighting against an adversary's military tactics, which puts a strain on you around 60%, and while you're still fighting defensive, offensive war, where majority of your allies are fighting a defensive war and you're the only one going for offensive strikes, then you're the one who get hit once the corresponding action comes in. And that is what has actually happened in this 40-day war. Now, in comparison to that, Iran has taken 13,000 plus hits from the United States and Israel. And even then, we need to understand that wars do not end because, militarily one side wins and the other loses. It always depends upon the cost of war and also the resolve of the people to fight it through. And what we had seen was the resolve was there for the United States, and also the resolve was there for Iran. But the realization is that the next phase of war could be devastating, and that is why they're in Islamabad, and that is why they understand that it is better to negotiate with each other, because at the end of the day, they will be the ones picking up the biggest cost of war.
Yeah, and of course, the war is not just taking place in Iran, or had not just been taking place in Iran, but also in Lebanon, which is also a big sticking point of these negotiations. And Dania, you're American, you live in the United States. Can you help us understand why the U.S. is going to bat for a war that is not its war? The United States is not dropping bombs on Lebanon. Israel is. Why are they so insistent on letting the Israelis continue that, even if it's to a lesser extent?
Well, I think the U.S.'s longstanding policy has been to try to empower the Lebanese armed forces and the sovereignty of Lebanon actually over Hezbollah, where Israel has actually, and this is a divergence between the Israel and the U.S., Israel has actually tried to disempower Hezbollah through military means. Therefore, I think they're in disagreement about Lebanon to a certain degree. It doesn't mean that the U.S. is necessarily reining in Israel, but I know that, for example, in the current circumstance, the U.S. has reined in Israel and told Israel to pull down the tempo a little bit when it came to attacking Hezbollah, and Israel followed suit. So I don't think they're actually seeing eye to eye. I think where they see eye to eye is both of them see Hezbollah as an enemy, per se. Obviously, more so from the Israeli perspective, but they have a different way of trying to address it.
Yeah. All right. We've got to leave it there. Dania Dhafar and Maria Sultan, we appreciate the expertise from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran has led to optimism about the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But traffic remains at a fraction of normal levels, and hundreds of ships remain stranded. Kulsum Sharif explains.
Before the war, more than 100 ships transited the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That's more than 36,000 tankers a year. Now, 20% of global oil and natural gas pass through this critical waterway. But Iran's effective closure of it has stranded hundreds of oil tankers, and other ships in the Gulf. Now, this is what we can see since Tuesday, the day of the ceasefire. And this image is from marinetraffic.com that lets us track vessel movements in real time. And what we see here is very little movement around the bend, but we see many ships that are stranded on either side. Now, before the truce was announced, US President Donald Trump had said reopening the strait was a requirement for any deal. Now, Tehran, for its part, says the passage of ships needs to be coordinated with its military. Now, the state news agency has released this map from Iran's Revolutionary Guard. It basically outlines a new route for ships to take. To simplify, I have this image here. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard are basically saying that ships need to sail through Iranian waters right around Larak Island and pass out this way and avoid the earlier normal path for the risk of naval mines. So the new path is effectively this way. Tehran has also indicated under a new permanent deal, they would seek to charge a fee for ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Tehran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz since the start of the war has continued to roil energy markets, and supplies have further been hit with attacks on energy infrastructure right across the region, from Saudi Arabia, the world's largest crude oil exporter, to Qatar, a global leading LNG exporter.
All right, joining me in the studio is Alexander Hudistanu. He's a military defense analyst. Alexander, thank you for being here. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz here. The Americans say that 2 warships transited the strait. The Iranians are denying this. Do you agree with our previous guest, Maria Sultan, that essentially the Iranians would have to allow the Americans to pass because they wouldn't be able to otherwise? Do you agree with that assessment?
So there is not an effective blockade installed there, so ships can pass, but yes, they will have to be allowed more or less or not under attack when that happens. This is why I came to call this the curious case of Schrodinger's Strait. It's open and closed at the same time, and it just depends on who is actually asking to pass through the strait. So for some vessels, the strait is open. For some vessels, the strait is absolutely closed, and it's a duality that it's in the hands of Iran so far. There are military options to force open it, but the risk is too great, and nobody will assume that cost.
The U.S. president has been sending messages on his Truth Social platform today, insisting that Iran's military, including their entire Navy and Air Force, are completely destroyed. I mean, do you agree with that assessment? Is completely destroyed the adjectives that you would use?
It's hard to tell the level of destruction obtained by U.S. and Israel strikes during this 40 days war. For sure, there are still threats that Iran can pose. For sure, there are still vectors there that can be mines. For sure, there are still vectors there that can be mines, drones, surface drone or aerial drones, that is, and small boats, fast boats that can still be used to threaten the traffic. That's why we don't really see a resurgence of traffic passing through the strait since the ceasefire. We have seen a more diverse range of vessels passing in terms of types and flags, but are still the same, more or less, owners that were allowed to pass previously. But again, a bit more diversity, but still not open, commercially open.
I just want to briefly ask you about Lebanon, if I can. Obviously, this is becoming a sticking point in these negotiations with Iran. Based on what you have seen in Lebanon, the pattern of bombing, the boots on the ground, where they've been. What do you think the Israeli endgame is here in Lebanon? Are they trying to actually hold territory or just make a dent in Hezbollah's ability to strike them?
It's hard to say at this point, but we have seen Israel pushing always for this idea of having more buffer zones, more buffer space around. So it might be on that line of thought. And also that's why we might see this fragmentation of the war front. We have Iran and US engaged in negotiation, but at the same time, Israel says Lebanon is not part of this ceasefire. We are still going to bomb Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and we'll have direct negotiations with Lebanon government. So it feels like a strategic separation of this track in the military area, and it might have to do with this buffer zone mentality.
All right, Alexandru Hudishtanu, we appreciate the expertise. Thank you.
Thank you also.
Well, Israeli airstrikes have intensified across southern Lebanon, with at least 10 people reported killed. Residential areas in the Nabatea district have been hit as attacks spread across several towns. Health officials say homes, infrastructure, and civilian facilities have been heavily